So you still remember the overall package of the setup of the project? Yeah, we took a look at the current state of play in 21, 22. We had various surveys to actually do the surveying. We talked to many different colleagues. We carried out interviews. We wrote many reports. We just learned about some of the technical deep dive results, and now we're trying to wrap things up. Yeah, so we're trying to summarize, and we wish that there were automatic summarization tools for strategic agendas, but they don't exist yet. Maybe we should build one. But we tried in the past few weeks and months with our teams to really extract the most important recommendations, to prioritize them, the most important findings. And Jan Hajic and I, we will now in turn attempt to give you a brief overview of our language technology vision for 2030. So first up, Jan Hajic will concentrate on the needs and ideas and demands for the four main technical fields, also dovetailing nicely into what was just discussed in the panel discussion. And then I will try to give a brief overview of the main recommendations of the SRIA. Okay, so Jan, first up, the floor is yours.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So what I will try to do is to sort of have a bridge between what you have heard so far, especially now in the deep dive panel, and what Georg is going to say about what is the state of the SRIA and the main recommendations. So, of course, the SRIA will not only take the visions and the recommendations from the deep dives, but also from all the other instruments that we have heard about before, like the surveys and the language reports and the interviews that we have provided with the many people that you have where you have seen the numbers. So to start this short bridge, I will really concentrate only on the top level situation or visions that came out from all these sources. So the fact is that we are, for a couple of years, at a big paradigm shift. Even though the biggest paradigm shift, I think, happened in the 90s when we came from the sort of the rule-based systems to statistical and machine learning. Now we are, of course, we did a big leap, we as a community, big leap by using the deep learning methods and came to the status that we have today. Now, of course, this is continuing. It's not that there was one moment when we changed technology. Now we are looking at multilingual models and very large language models with lots of possible uses for the future. So this is the sort of the status where we are now. Now, what is the vision? What we should do with this, and where are the challenges still there? I mean, the problem has not been solved. Of course, we probably all agree on that. So the first challenge, which probably you hear here every 5 minutes, is the low resource languages problem. And of course, this is at the core of the Language Equality Project to take care about those. And of course, the technology can help, and the community efforts can help in this case. Now, the progress in language technology will allow new applications to happen, which were not possible before. We have heard about quality, and of course, every time we increase the quality, it suddenly enables applications which were not possible before. And then, of course, this overall goal can be described as either the general AI, of course, including language, or natural language understanding. That's a very broad term, which of course would be hard to define in detail, but that's the vision that we want to go if we talk about language technology, and of course use this in the applications for the overall good in many cases. So here is a little timeline where I put what technology, what basic underlying technology we have been using. And you see that the intervals are shortening. So in fact, when we talk about a paradigm shift, we probably will see another paradigm shift in 2 or 3 years, a big one, like between statistical and deep learning. We don't know what this is going to be. And if we talk about 2030, probably in 2032, or something, we will see yet another paradigm shift. So we should be ready for this, for demands and requirements in terms of data, technology, use, legal rules, which we don't even know, which technology it will cover. So this is just to have in mind that that we might see two such shifts not only in our lives but actually pretty early from now. So this is just the very, very basics. So now, when we talk about the language technology landscape in 8 years from now, of course, the main areas are the ones that we have just listened to at the panel, and that's machine translation, speech technologies, text processing in general, and the data and knowledge. And in these 4 areas, we have these deep dives, and the results will, of course, go to the SRIA. So I will now just again summarize on a very top level each of those. So for machine translation, the vision as we got it from all these sources is that there will be that machine translation will become invisible. I mean, that's invisible in the sense that it will be completely transparent, will be everywhere, that no one will have to care about which language they talk, and the other people will understand in their own language. So again, this is the vision. In speech technology, I think we probably have even more to do. That everything that requires speech, of course, there are applications which do not need speech. And of course, there are applications which do not need translation. But in applications that could use speech, we will have speech. It will have enough quality to understand anything that we say or the machine say in all environments. I mean, everyone who has speech-enabled navigation in your car know what I'm talking about. It doesn't understand you in 90% of the cases because it's, there is too much noise otherwise and so on. So this is the vision for speech technology. Anything that can be talked to will understand you what you are saying. In the general text processing, we still have things to do. Of course, we can do information extraction, we can do data mining, text mining, other things even today. But we can only do it well in the few languages that we have always seen on the screen, like having enough support for that. One thing which we haven't used so far is the human in the loop, and I mean it very broadly. Human in the loop at the training time, human in the loop when we need explanation and interpretation, what the computer is doing with those data, all the way to the real applications where there will be interaction between the human and the system in whichever, financial intelligence, other intelligence, and so on. Now, data, of course, will play a role. Okay, I put these question marks into which technology is coming next, but there is no doubt that it will be data-based, whatever it's going to be. So we'll still need to make a big effort to have the current data available, and probably we'll have to create new data for whichever it's coming up in the future. Some data might become less relevant, but there will be certainly other data that will be even more relevant for that. And of course, we need all the data in all the languages. Now, when we talk about the structured data, unstructured data, we need the unstructured, the structured data linked to all languages that we have. So we need ontologies, but we need ontologies linked to all the languages that we want to work with. Otherwise, it might be difficult to connect these two things together very well. And we have heard some very good news from when Martin was talking at the panel before. Now, all of this is being done to have positive impact on society, on every one of us, everywhere in Europe and elsewhere. So one of the impacts, of course, for example, of the ubiquitous and transparent machine translation is the turning down, the burning of the language barriers, as Georg said and others said at the panel as well. And this will have consequences like bigger mobility in Europe, communication across borders, hopefully, cross Europe businesses which do not have any barriers, and not even the language barrier. Education. I actually believe that we will have better education if we have good LT and AI, and maybe paradoxically, we will have better foreign language learning. I mean, we still need people to talk as many languages as possible, and we should be able to help. I mean, current problem in foreign language teaching is teachers and the way that they can evaluate and help the students to learn the other language. and to have some help from AI would be great. And of course, there are impacts of that. You will be able to communicate better about culture. You will be able to learn culture of other communities in Europe which are speaking another language. You will be better informed about the cultural heritage of other nations, and that will hopefully lessen the frictions that are still there. Then language content creation. We have some examples today. For example, in one of the projects my colleagues were doing, they let the computer or the robot or whoever you call it to write a theater play, which was actually performed in a physical theater. And one of the reviews of the theater critics was that the computer thinks like Bennett, so it was sort of funny that they looked at it as if it was really written by someone intelligent, even though it was just a big language model. But we will see more help from AI in doing things like this. So even in general creation in not only text and speech, but also video and multimedia and so on. And then healthcare is just one example cited many times here as well, where we can see the benefits clearly even today, and I'm sure there will be more such cases. Now, talking about these big visions and hopefully positive impacts on the society, we are of course not throwing everything that we have done so far and we are doing out of this. We will have to continue. I cited data, but there should be strong fundamental research. We are certainly not done with the methods. We would like to know what the question mark will be replaced by doing fundamental research. And that's something we should get support for as well. Now, of course, in the applied part, we should learn from other parts of the world how they did it. And for example, by many more competitive maybe even funding streams and other projects, so learn from DARPA and other agencies which actually do it that way. And that was a big drive for applied and experimental technology progress, and something like that should be done in Europe, especially in the multilingual settings. I talked about data, education, AI and language technology education, maybe not only higher education, but we should go at the lower levels, look at the high schools, teach them what AI and LT can do for them, and that way also get more students for our universities. We will still have problems on the legal front, and by problems I mean either not enough or too much regulation. I don't really mean just AI regulation. I mean the copyright regulation, which is still behind other countries, and GDPR, which some hate, but I think it's not that bad, but we should certainly know how to work with it and maybe change it for the purposes of doing research in many of these new application areas. And finally, of course, for all of this, we would need some continued public support. So this was I probably did a lot of disservice to all these people that created these reports that we provided in this project, especially the deep dives, a lot of work behind that and behind the surveys and all of that, in just summarizing all of this in 10 minutes. But Georg, please now, it's your turn to say how it will be reflected in the SRIA and how we will actually get there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jan. So I will try to summarize even more. So we are getting more and more abstract and general. And Jan is right, of course. Yeah, so many groups, so many colleagues, interviews have been done, and there are so many good nuggets in the reports. And we now have we are in the unfortunate position that we have to summarize all of these, ideally into 10, 15, 20 bullet points, so that we can present these plans to the European Union. So let me take 3 or 4 steps back. That was, I think, the first slide in the morning. Whole goal of the project is the development of a strategic research, innovation and implementation agenda to achieve digital language equality in Europe by 2030. This is happening in this work package here, work package 3, which is being fed by all these different reports and deliverables, even some non-contractual reports that we take on board, as a very, very long and boring table. It looks like this. That's the list of our deliverables in the project. We can summarize it a little bit. If we summarize the 30-something language reports into one line and the deep dives into one line, so it looks like this. It's even readable by now. We can take out some of the administrative deliverables, then it looks like this, somewhat manageable, yeah, but still remember, mind you, that the language reports summarized as one line here. So, and then next step was, of course, the strategic agenda development. We came up with an outline of that document. It looks like this. 7 chapters, with the title of the deliverable. First, we will talk about the multilingual Europe situation and digital technologies in general. Then trends and megatrends are very important. Also has to do with technology forecasting. What will be the big trends in 2030? I think the main trends are very, very clear. Yeah, more mobile devices, more technologies embedded in, probably in furniture, in chairs that you can talk to them. So these embedded devices will be everywhere, just as one example. In chapter 3 or section 3, we will talk about LT and language-centric AI, talking about the state of the art. Then we need to talk about digital language equality. Where do we stand right now? Primarily informed by the language reports and the various summaries that we produced out of these. Then we are getting closer to the target, language technology and digital language equality in 2030. What is our technology vision and priority research themes that we need to develop? And then our main recommendations for the shared European program for language technology and digital language equality in Europe by 2030. And then the final section will be the roadmap. How do we get there? So roughly, yeah, if we want to attach page numbers, it will roughly look like this. Nothing is set in stone, but I guess it will be something between 80 and 100 pages or so, this document. It shouldn't be too long, and it needs to be summarized even further beyond that, because no politician in Brussels will read 100 pages. This document is in production now, yeah, so we are writing it as we speak, not really, but we will continue after the conference, of course. It will be published as a standalone document online. In addition, an abridged version which focuses on the main recommendations will be published in the ELE book. So, what's the process? These first 5 parts can be very easily sourced and taken and informed by reusing and summarizing existing deliverables. We've already started doing that. It's a very straightforward process to get this done. The last part, the roadmap, will illustrate the timeline and the temporal order of the different steps that we suggest to the European Union to take. That will be quite short and, again, straightforward. And then in section 6, the main recommendations. So, all in all, section 6 will be structured like this, roughly. 6 different parts. And you will soon see why I'm presenting this right now. First, an overview, main concept, what are the key recommendations, then recommendations in various areas: research, technology and data, infrastructure, policy, and governance. And I will tackle those one by one immediately after this outline, just to give you a brief glimpse of where we currently stand. Again, the process, what we've done is the main recommendations we extracted from the various ELE deliverables. You've just seen the list. It was very long. And having said that, many, many thanks to the colleagues who helped with that, Maria, Annika, Aritz, and others, who went through the reports once more to extract all these recommendations. We have an extremely long and complex spreadsheet with all of them, yeah, that we are still analyzing and trying to structure to take as many of these on board as we can. And it needs to be stressed that, of course, the whole community contributed to these. Yeah, we are the project, yes, with 52 partners, but to the different deliverables, many additional colleagues participated, many additional surveys were circulated. We suspect that in total, from the core team, between 500 and 750 people contributed to this exercise, plus all of those who participated in the EU Citizen Survey, more than 20,000 people. All of that will also be taken on board. So in terms of scope and participation, much bigger thing than the MetaNet SRA, for example, it had about 200 participants and contributors. So let's look at the main recommendations, yeah, and yeah, I'm sorry, the slides are very text heavy. That's the way these recommendations are, I'm afraid. And I would just focus on some of them, not all of them. That would be too much. So main recommendations in terms of research. Refocus and massively strengthen European LT and NLP research through a large-scale initiative as a shared collaborative program between the EU and participating countries, which we term ELE program. Again, the name is not set in stone. We can change it if some other name makes more sense. The initial scientific goal is still liked by everyone. Yeah, so this notion of deep natural language understanding by 2030 will be put in there. We need to focus on language equality and the provisioning of technologies, services, and resources outside the often preferred languages. Also leveraging multimodal and multilingual resources to support the development of applications for languages and varieties with scarce resources. For MT, we need better context modeling. We need to talk about visual features. How can we combine different modalities to improve machine translation? We need to tackle machine translation quality, focus more upon research that looks into the root causes of MT performance issues. In terms of speech, natural synthetic voices, ASR, MT, text-to-speech should focus on a wide variety of languages, including variants that was mentioned all the time, and dialects to keep those alive. And in text analytics, research on deep natural language understanding, which integrates speech, NLP, and context, and additional modalities. So this trend, notion of multimodality was everywhere, yeah, across the board. But that's also reflected through current research results with multimodal language models, as Jonas Androules demonstrated nicely yesterday in the keynote speech. What else in terms of research? As you can see, it's 3 different slides here for research only. The others are only 1 slide each, I think. Create large open access language models for all European languages. Another big trend mentioned in almost every single report. I think it's in every single language report, if I'm not mistaken. Language models are everywhere in terms of demand. Yeah. The next sentence was, we don't have enough data. We need sufficient data sources so that we can create these language models at all. For fine-tuning, for downstream tasks, so not only creation of models, but data sets for training models and multilingual models, including the tooling that is needed for models. And as 2 additional things that were mentioned, different ideas, inclusion of symbolic methods, knowledge representation, knowledge graphs, ontologies into language models. There's lots of research there, but it's only in its infancy. And models that include discourse features, for example. Combination of long-term encyclopedic knowledge with short-term learned knowledge representations, more interdisciplinary research, also towards multimodal environments, focus on trustworthy, interoperable, explainable LT, NLP, and AI, and the idea of creating something like semantic AI based on the combination of statistical AI and symbolic AI was mentioned in various reports. Not necessarily with these terms, but these terms, I think I took them from the data deep dive. Martin mentioned these as well. Combination of interactive language technology or conversational AI, it's essentially the same thing, with text, knowledge, and multimedia technologies for a new generation of applications, where you maybe can interactively converse and have a dialogue with an interactive book or an interactive piece of content that is dynamically computed, like the theater play that Jan Hajic mentioned just a few minutes ago. Based on the needs and necessities of the less resourced language communities, focus on few-shot and transfer learning for settings in which training data is not available. Interesting idea was to design a general enough representation of the world around us, like a digital twin of the world, or maybe of Europe. Build or assemble and convert existing world knowledge databases, and then to combine these with other databases, with language models, and then using inferencing and updating of this knowledge base. There was a quite visionary idea that was mentioned in one of the reports. There was a need mentioned for language and culture-specific technologies, not just transfer from English, but actually working on the relevant languages. But I think both strands should be followed. You see the first bullet point item here. Language technology should be inclusive and non-discriminatory. It should address safety and security, also addressing aspects like hate speech, fake news, and so on. That was also mentioned a bunch of times. And raise awareness of digital language equality in international fora, and also the creation of open access journals was mentioned as an outlet for this research direction. Development of technologies covering more linguistic phenomena and also text types was mentioned, and more systematic inclusion of sign languages. In terms of technology and data, and of course there is overlap between these different areas, so that it's clear these are not clearly cut, clearly distinct, there is overlap. So some of these recommendations could also be fitting in other of these categories. Reduce the technology and resource gap between Europe's languages, and one of the main important aspects, address the huge problem of a lack of available data. This is relevant for almost all European languages, maybe not for English, which is kind of like a baseline, but for all the other languages, it's a huge issue. We need to have more focus upon systematic language data collection, not only text, but dialogue, multimodal, audio, video, combinations thereof. Exploit automatic data generation, synthetic data, crowdsourcing, translation of data. It was mentioned to unleash the power of public sector data from broadcasters, social media, publishers, and many other terms could be mentioned here as well. These are just a few example sectors, if you will. Develop methods to overcome the unequal data availability, again, more technology-oriented, by focusing on annotation transfer, multilingual models, preserving quality, few-shot and zero-shot learning. Focus upon open ecosystems, open source, open access, open standards, interoperability, and foster international standardization of European approaches in language technology. More systematic research in data bias, including dimensions of bias and how to tackle bias in the first place. Focus upon green LT with as low a carbon footprint as possible. Model compression, model distillation is being worked on, and development of new methodologies for transfer and adaptation of resources and technologies to other domains and languages. Infrastructure recommendations. This was a bit more clear-cut. Long-term support of infrastructure initiatives, and only this then allows implementation of actual interoperability. So like LT infrastructures and data spaces that support research and development activities, ELG was mentioned a number of times there. Strengthen and reinforce investment into ELG as the primary European language technology platform, enable and foster the sharing of resources services, data, models, and code between all stakeholders. Infrastructures are essential for maximizing the exploitation potential of publicly funded research results. Clearly, that's the case. And sufficient operational capacity needs to be ensured, especially for language models. And also throughout the day, yesterday, I was approached by several colleagues, several participants of the conference, if ELG could be able, for example, to host models, language models. Can we offer inferencing for these? Right now we can't, because we don't have the compute in the background, which would create a much larger bill that we have to face on a monthly basis. But of course, this is something that we would love to do as ELG. I think maybe it's even part of the core mission of ELG to be able to do something like this. Because maybe not every country, not every research center should do that by themselves. Maybe they should focus upon the actual research, and the hosting could be done in a more centralized way. Okay, end of the footnote. Infrastructures should provide interoperability by following standards for data interoperability, as well as services and innovative metadata and data management tools for the whole data life cycle. This is something that the language data space also will address, if I understand the concept correctly. Mentioned all the time, also today and yesterday, ensure access to high-performance compute infrastructures and suitable compute infrastructure. Current HPC centers come with too much administrative overhead and often do not meet the needs of our community. And deposit all publicly funded resources in one central repository. So a bunch of infrastructure recommendations. I labeled these slides as draft because that's what they are. So I went through all recommendations, but there are some overlaps. We need to sort these out in a more clear-cut way. Ideally, reduce the number of total bullet points a bit more and make it a bit more comprehensive. That's why it's not set in stone yet. Let's look at the policy recommendations. The main one is, and probably will be, to establish, and recommendation to the European Union, to establish a large-scale, long-term coordinated funding program for research, development, and innovation in the field of LT at European, national, and regional levels, tailored specifically to Europe's needs and demands to tackle deep natural language understanding as the next scientific breakthrough. With a couple of sub-bullet points here: increase efficiency by sharing infrastructures, resources, and knowledge with a view to developing innovative technologies and services, increase interdisciplinary collaboration between research centers, academia, enterprises, SMEs, startups, and other stakeholders. Also boost long-term basic research. That's typically not the mission of EU programs. They don't typically support basic research, maybe apart from ERC, as well as knowledge and technology transfer between countries and regions. So this is where the balance between what the countries and the regions can do in terms of basic research and what the EU needs to do then in terms of coordination. There we need to find a good balance. And very, very important, efficient and targeted creation of data sets and language resources that needs to be supported. That was mentioned also a bunch of times. What is meant here is small-scale projects. Think about what Svetla Koeva presented for the Bulgarian data set. She presented that yesterday as one of the ELG pilot projects. Sometimes it just needs 80,000 euros, 100,000 euros, so that you have the capacity to build a new data set that will fill a gap. And there are many of these gaps throughout Europe. And maybe a long 9 million euro project is not the right instrument for that. And I think the success of the ELG open pilots has clearly shown, with more than 200 proposals, that there is a very, very big need for these targeted, short, highly focused data resource creation projects, let's call them. And Germán presented this earlier today. We need to include LT, NLP, and language-related topics in the national AI language and data policies, as well as strategies, so especially with regard to coordination. Okay, last slide, governance model. Talking about coordination, this long-term large-scale funding program is foreseen to be a shared collaborative program between the EU and the participating countries. So on the level of the European Union, coordination needs to happen, coordination between the different countries that participate in this long-term funding program. Here, that's the right level for shared platforms, shared infrastructures, maybe sharing the same scientific goals and objectives. We can talk about different shared tasks so that different teams from the different countries can participate on the same challenges and then compete. And also shared data provision. On the level of participating countries, it's pretty much clear, I guess. There we need national and regional funding to develop technologies and resources for all relevant languages of said country. I think it's not reasonable to expect that the EU will support the development of technologies for 30+ languages. There needs to be a good balance. Spain is now also moving ahead with a large-scale program. There will be lots and lots coming out of this. We have technologies for Icelandic emerging, for Estonian. So maybe these can also be used as template language technology programs on the national level that other countries can maybe copy or maybe use as good examples so that we can get a coordinated European program off the ground. It was mentioned that the topic of language technology should be allocated to the portfolio of a commissioner so that our topic gets more visibility and recognition in the EU, and the creation of a Center for Linguistic Diversity was also mentioned. Require all European projects to have a language diversity plan, so that they show that they take the language topic, the multilingualism topic seriously. We could require them to have their software UIs. If it's a software project, we could require them to have at least, 3 languages in the UI or 5 or 10, so that it's not only English, but maybe more languages taken into account. And procurement was mentioned once again as one important mechanism and instrument to support the local LT industry. And that was also mentioned a number of times, learn from DARPA. In DARPA programs, what is often perceived to be the decisive factor is the level of competition. And this level of competition, or the aspect of competition, is pretty much non-existent in European programs. And why not have one topic and 3 competing projects that run for 3 years or for 5 years, and then we can see which one gets the best results. And they will definitely get results then. So this was mentioned also a number of times. So that was the very, very brief overview of the SRIA. That took much longer than expected, actually, but we still have a couple of minutes for questions, comments, or maybe if you see that some of the very important bullet points are missing, now would be a good time to shout. Are there any comments or questions? François. And also to Jan, of course, what Jan presented. The microphone should be on. No? That one is on.
Yes, thanks a lot for all this work on trying to summarize everything that has been written in the report. I tend to sympathize with the focus on low-resource languages, but I would also like to emphasize the need to be worried about the hyper-resource languages, like new languages that are happening in the international scene, like Chinese, like Indian, like Russian, and we have to make sure that we have technologies to at least translate and maybe also process these languages in the future, because I mean that's probably where a lot of the future science will come, for instance from China and also from Japan. And if we don't pay attention to these languages and to the fact that we need technology, and also for businesses, I mean, and Arabic is another one, and for businesses, all these languages are really important, and we need also to develop the technologies to process these languages in Europe.
Thanks, I agree. Full stop.
And maybe just as a short comment, because Georg, you mentioned DARPA. We shouldn't forget what DARPA stands for. It's the defense agency. And I know that some people have doubts, second thoughts about getting in contact with defense intelligence. But we shouldn't forget that this is also a very important field of funding, especially in the light of what's happening in Ukraine right now, and maybe a rethinking of European defense spending. Language is really important. People who dominate people's terminology dominate their minds. Propaganda, fake news, disinformation. Russians are super at that, so are the Chinese, and so on. So maybe we should also rethink. I mean, for us, it's not a problem. We are a defense company, but maybe we should also rethink our not wanting to get too close to that sort of funding, because it can be a very important factor to get projects, languages, technologies off the ground.
Yes.
Since we're in the comment session, I may just add something. And starting with the DARPA, I think the DARPA, contrary to what I have seen, is not about competition, because in many cases they merge consortia. It's about a roadmap. DARPA says, we want this in the next 3 years, or in the next 4 years, or in the next 10 years. And they put 100% funding on the table. They benchmark the progress, etc., and then pre-select and then select in different phases. So it's not really about competition, it's about a goal. And Europe has a very clear record in that. In the 90s, European Commission co-funded with private sector a large number of resources. Some of you may remember we have SpeechDat, Speakon, Speech.car, and the like. The European Commission had a very clear goal to support all the big players at that time, Philips, Daimler, Siemens, and the like. I think we have the records on how to do that and what is the best approach to do it. The keywords that I missed in the presentation, but they were highlighted very, very in small characters, if I may say so, is the partnership between the public and the private sector. We're planning a roadmap for the next 10 years. And nothing says that the big players or maybe emerging European players will not solve the problem in the next 3-4 years. So if we focus too much on the purely Commission funding, maybe with a little bit of national funding, and forget completely the European private sector, we will lose a very, very important momentum. And maybe a very private joke about the recommendation. I think some of the people might still remember that in FLAIRNet, which is the ancestor of MetaNet and all the like, we had a book with recommendations. And the question is, how much commitment from those who will be getting the recommendations from us is there? Would the European Commission commit that what comes out of our ELE, ELE2 are recommendations that will be taken as a commitment from the Commission side and implement at least the top 3 or the top 10 out of this? Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something that I've been missing in the discussion so far, which is also relevant to Europe, and that's the issue of migration. So a lot of the discussion has focused on small languages, under-resourced languages within Europe, obviously, but also migration is happening, and with the current state, with climate change and the geopolitical situation, it would be naive to assume that there will not be large waves of immigration coming into Europe and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just like, people will migrate to Europe, and I think a European strategy should also aim at providing the multilingual resources to help people integrate quickly. So that just as a comment.
Great, thanks so much. I essentially fully agree to all statements, which we have on board, but maybe they need to be emphasized in a slightly different way. We have one online question or comment. Annika?
Yeah, one comment regarding the SRIA. The policy recommendations from ELAN. It's important that we ask the EU for a regulation or directive for digital language equality, especially as we have the EU's strong support for digital language equality. As services are increasingly digitalized, it's vital that citizens can access them in their language, state and territorial. Otherwise, there will be infringements of language rights. States must be required to make services available in state and territorial languages. Also, the specific needs of regional and minority languages needs to be prioritized with support and funding so they can catch up.
Okay. Good. We will revisit the recording of the session, of course, and then address these comments accordingly. I don't think that there are any more hands up. You're right on time, 3 o'clock. Nevertheless, it was a long session, so let's briefly extend the coffee break a little bit. Let's reconvene at 3:20 and enjoy your coffee. Thanks so much.